Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile, Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hi there, and welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with your host, Peter Robbins, who is me, and my guests every week. Who are they? This show is one I've been looking forward to, particularly because my guest, colleague and friend is in Cheshire, England, and it's can be problematic to do a live show that starts at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. That means if you're on Greenwich Mean Time, you begin at midnight and wind up at 2 a.m. In some cases, I believe the Geneva Convention sanctions this as a punishable offense. So we have my guest, Jason Gleaves, here, pre-recording this show at a much more generally sane time. Jason is a researcher, author, photo analyst, and artist who was born in 1969 in Liverpool, England. He served in the Royal Air Force, then went on to work at British Aerospace Airbus Division and BTEC, and I'm going to get what that stands for as we bring you on. National Diploma in Computer-Aided Drafting in Engineering for Shell Oil, same diploma in Carpentry and Joinery, National Diploma in Aircraft Finishing, Electrostatic Powder Coating Techniques, high expertise in modern civilization and military worldwide aircraft, armaments, recognition, and visualization. Jason Gleaves lives and works in Cheshire, England, and is the author of, I believe, 3 books: UFO Photos, Computer Analysis of Worldwide UFO Images Throughout the Ages, UFO Encounters, Up Close and Personal, and the Ufology Umbrella, Close Encounters Are Not Enough. Jason Gleaves, welcome finally to Meanwhile Here on Earth, my friend.
Hi, Peter. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and this has been so long in the making. We finally got there.
Yay! I had hoped we would find you as we find you. Boy, I know people that would pay good money to spend time in that room that you are in there. There are so many questions that I have for you, and we've talked about them off camera and when we were together last year in England and before we went on the show. So let me begin at the beginning. We know you were born in 1969 in Liverpool. Can you tell us a little bit about your family and your childhood?
Yeah, well, all my family are from Liverpool originally, so who were actually left with us. I lost my dad last year, sadly, but yeah, I've always had an interest in ufology right through, even from a young boy, but it really became more apparent when I had a sighting with my sister, aged 7 years old, in Liverpool in Aintree. That's the home of the famous Grand National race that we have here in the UK. And we were playing upstairs in our grandparents' house, quite innocently, and I'd actually forgotten what had happened. This has gone completely out of my head. And we both saw a disc-shaped craft hover outside the bedroom window when we were playing, and then it flew away at high velocity, and then we just carried on like nothing had happened. Very unusual. I was 7, my sister was 8 at the time. Bit like yourself, family members and everything in. My father as well also had a man in black experience when he was a young boy. in Liverpool again. This was in the 50s, 1950s. He was basically playing at home. This was before when they had TV, so everyone listened to the radio. My grandparents were in the front room, and he was running backwards and forwards into the hallway. As he came into the hallway itself, he looked forward, and along the end of the front door, it was a dark figure manifested itself through the front door. He said it looked to him, he's ex-army himself, so he would never really speak about things like this. And he said at the time, what he can remember, it manifested itself through the front door. It looked like a Second World War pilot to him. Now that's whether the gear and everything and he ran through and manifested to the bottom of the stairs where it beckoned him to follow him upstairs, which of course he didn't. He did an about turn, ran back in to tell my grandparents, and they just poo-pooed it like everybody else does and said, no, you're imagining things, went back and it had gone, So all the way through, my family. But from then on, I think I started to read and start to watch. There wasn't that many UFO things around in the 70s as a young boy. So really it was just things where you went to a library, the Eric Van Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, things like that. Always the first book people generally pick up. And then they started to bring out unexplained magazines, like Ghosts and Loch Ness Monster and UFOs, of course. And then we'd start to look, and I'd just read and read going in, and I'd want more and more and more again. I've always been into art and made things, right the way through. I think as long as I can remember. Yeah. But after that first event with my sister, that's when things took off. It just exploded for the artistic side.
Jason, there are strong parallels, of course, between the experience you had with your sister on that sighting and the one I had with mine. Did much time pass before the two of you acknowledged that it had happened and that you both remembered it and discussed it?
Yeah, a long time passed. We were only a few years back. It was probably about 2015, 14, 15. And I was at my sister's house and we were just talking in general because I'd started to get into the ufology side more again. I'll go into that in a bit more, with Philip Mantle and everybody else, and we were talking, my sister and I, and she said, "Do you remember when we both saw that disc-shaped craft outside the window?" And I went, "No." And it slowly came back to me. It was like a tap had been opened, and it was like, "Oh, yeah." And it just twigged. It was strange, really strange. And then, and then we would go in. So then I would start to get into the ufology side, of which I've always been interested in. Again, watching all the DVDs, and then YouTube came here, and wow, we had all the access to everything.
Jason, do you feel that you had contact experiences growing up, or that this was something that you were drawn to, aside from the sighting, because of just a deep intellectual curiosity, or some combination of both?
I think it started like that, but then the more I thought about it, the more I've gone over things and things that happened to me as well. All the years right through my military career, right into civilian. I mean, in the military, I was on the base at RAF Cosford when the huge triangle-shaped craft came down over the base.
Really?
In 1993. It's all on the internet. You can find all the information there.
Tell us a bit about it, though. The circumstances, set the scene, and describe the craft, and gosh, whatever else is going on around it.
Well, the MOD have actually released the official papers when they did a while back. You go right into it anyway. From the base, it was March 1993. I was actually on the base, and it was a good friend of mine was the orderly corporal in the guard room of that night. It was a quiet night. Where the guard room is, it's not far out. You can come out just to your right, out under the railway bridge, and then there's the airfield. So it's really, really close to where the guard house is and everything else in relation. And it was, like I said, it was a quiet night like everything else. All the radios were quiet. Everyone was sort of settling down for the evening. And there was a young RAF Cosford as a training camp. So that's where the armourers and people like that are all trained in the Air Force. And part of their duties are to do guard duty, which everybody has to do. This young airman was on the airfield guard post. And next minute in the guard room, when I spoke to my friend a while after, which he was very reluctant to speak about, and he still won't come forward. You know, he's sort of old school, if you want to call it that way. And he said all of a sudden the radio's burning, and this young airman was screaming down the radio, saying, "Get the guard commander out, get the guard commander, there's something over the airfield." So obviously an emergency, the guard commander, all the guards, military police, everybody drove out to the base, out to the guard hut where this gate onto the airfield. When they all got there, they all saw this huge triangle, black triangle hovering over the airfield. It was basically the size of a battleship. It was huge.
My gosh.
And no sound, nothing at all. Your typical TR-3B type of craft. That's all I can sort of say.
Any idea of the estimate of the altitude based on your estimate of the size?
I don't know about the full altitude, but what I was told, it was the size of a battleship. So we're talking the airfield at Cosford is a large airfield. So for it to take probably a good size of that airfield up, hovering over, and then they all witnessed it, you know, the guard commanders, everybody else. And then what it did, it took off at high velocity, speeds again, but we haven't got anything like that. Off it went, but then it went to another RAF base nearby, which was RAF Shorebury. And this is two separate incidents that have been reported, so it's the same thing, you know. And it was a craft described to be very similar to one of Cosford's, and it came in over the airfield, and the on-duty air traffic controller actually witnessed, got a lock onto it coming into the airfield, and then it was firing very thin lasers down towards the ground, and as if it was actually looking for something. That's what the idea they got anyway. But on that evening throughout the UK, black triangles were seen throughout the UK. So it's all, again, everything's in, you know, conjunction of what happened. So that was a big incident that happened. And again, Nick Pope actually, he knows an awful lot about it because he actually did the paperwork side and the follow-up afterwards. So, yeah, that was a big thing, you know. Things
Let
that have
me just ask one more question about this. Were the personnel on the base in a general order or an understanding told in so many words this didn't happen, or if it did, you're not to discuss it with anyone, or it was just ignored, so to say, officially?
Well, I've never spoken to anybody else involved, the personnel, other than my friend who was the orderly corporal, you know, in charge of the guard room. But basically it was a do not talk about this. It was the usual time, and it took me a long time to get out of him the information that I did.
Jason, by the time you're coming through what we would call elementary school and moving on to, again, middle school or equivalent of high schools here, did you have a thought in your mind at that point of how what your idea of being an adult was going to be, what you wanted to be as what we call grown-ups.
Yeah, well, I always wanted to be a draftsman, and I also wanted to be a carpenter, and I've been lucky enough to be in both. I started off as a good draftsman, and that's where the Shell side, Shell Oils, I was in the actual Stanlow refinery, so I was actually working there. And then after so long thinking this wasn't for me, you know, I was lucky enough to be able to make that jump. And then I joined the Royal Air Force. And I was actually one of the last 8 to be trained by the Royal Air Force as the carpenter.
Oh, my goodness.
After our actual course finished, they disbanded the carpenters and went civilian. Again, money saving probably. But yeah, it's one of the oldest trades in the Air Force, carpentry. So I've been lucky enough to go right through there, working on the museum at Cosford, all the old aircraft.
Oh, great!
And then obviously training aids and right the way through. And then they actually did away with the carpentry, so I actually remustered to aircraft finisher. So that's where my paint spraying came in. Obviously trained. So, you know, it's been great because I can paint my own models. I can do cars, aircraft, you name it, you know. I've painted. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. As a boy, I don't know if it was kind of an equivalent passion growing up, particularly for boys in the UK as it was in the US back when I was a kid, that model making was, you know, part of your childhood. Buying the kits, whether it was cars or planes or boats, taking pride in gluing them together without glue on the outside, getting the decals right, and then graduating to enamel paints and that really skinny little brush, and taking pride in, you know, a work well done. Was that part of your childhood before you professionally became a fabricator?
Yeah, I'm just like everybody else, really, you know, going into that side. Yeah, I would make all kinds of spaceships, you know, obviously Spitfires and then Lancaster bombers. I mean, I bet I was lucky enough in the Air Force to work on the Battle of Britain Memorial flight.
Oh,
so I worked on the Lancaster bomber and the Spitfires and the Hurricanes. So I've been so lucky. I've worked on the Red Arrows. I've worked on right the way through, you know, many different aircraft you can think about and helicopters. So there's so much. It's really part of the journey that's got me to where I am now. It's all part of the painting, the carpentry, the making, the model making, even down to when I was a young child. We talked about people with the models, and then I wanted to do something because I was heavily influenced by the Star Wars figures, the Kenner ones, you know, and I thought people were obviously purchasing the larger models, but the smaller models are better for most people because they can put them on the side, or you know, you can either collect them. And I thought, well, how can I do it where you know, everybody tore the model out of the packaging and threw the packaging away, but they thought, I better. The people that actually kept the model in the packaging, I think they're a bit strange, because as a kid,
exactly.
Why?
It's
what?
So antithetical.
Yeah. So
you bring
again,
up...
like, well, the models, like you said. So what? You know, this is the next one that I brought out, which is the Strieber Alien. I thought, well, how can you keep both? I did it so where you can take the back out, and then obviously you can have the model separately, but you can also put it back in if you wanted it to be shown as that with the write-up on the back. And so that was how that sort of came about.
Yeah, and we are going to get into that shortly. But, you know, as you talk, you bring up memories for me. Maybe it's kind of a universal sort of coming of age experience for, I can only speak for boys, but talking about model making, I in those three groups, cars, ships, and planes, I gravitated toward aircraft. And being old enough to have a dad who was in the Army Air Corps and served in World War II, one of my first familiarities, and of course it's all romanticized to the nth degree, as only little boys can do when thinking of, the glories of the military. And I remember even thinking as a kid, building, the big company here was Revell, and they made Spitfires and Hurricanes and Lancasters and all the other major British war aircraft, as well as the American ones. And I remember making the Spitfire and, turning it around in my hand and things and saying, this is so simple compared to some of the American planes and, the more elaborate bombers. It was almost like an insect. It was so perfectly designed. And of course, it helped to keep, the Germans from the shores, the fascist invasion. It is a remarkable little machine, and I know informed my ideas about history. I guess the coming together of the model making sensibility, and correct me if I'm wrong, but input, for you coming up childhood in the 70s and into the 80s, that UFOs, real unidentified flying objects, and their implications for humanity, and the impact of some of the great cultural expressions of our time in terms of films like the Star Wars franchise, can kind of melt together a little bit. One can be an amazing moment in your childhood. I know friends of a certain age who talk about going to see that first Star Wars movie. I don't even remember. It just kind of went by me, and but the impact that it had, and the unabashed, proud fandom of that we all carry around for certain cultural artifacts, or our favorite sports team, or for me, a great artist or a great musical performer, whatever. That at a certain point, it all started to come together, and talking with you earlier, as an art school graduate, I remember thinking, as somebody who wanted to make it as a painter and do sculptures and work on my photography, that at that moment that I was in art school in the late 60s, to be a filmmaker, that was the vanguard, cutting edge, or a rock star, of course. But and thinking, even toying in my mind, I could, go full-time into film studies, and, that's modern painting, please, it's 12th century, but that's where, my interests lie. For you, at a certain point, we all started to hear about them. It was a news item because of the novelty involved, and because in America, pushing the possible dark and nefarious uses of this new remarkable tool created for industry, but commandeered more and more by a handful of artists, yourself and our dear friend Ronnie, at the vanguard of using these, Ronnie Kinsella, that is the 3D printer. And this is now, for you, a go-to tool, as much as a paintbrush or a palette knife or a hammer and chisel would be for a more traditional artist. Can you tell us how you first heard about or interfaced or even had the idea to try, invest the money in one of these things and start to use it as an artist tool?
Yeah, sure. Again, like everything, I just see it as part of the journey. It's part of everyone's separate journey, and we're all part of the big jigsaw puzzle, because we all fit in, and it becomes one big picture. And this is just part of it. I started through Philip Mantle again. Never wrote a book in my life. I'd read books and do everything else related, and then I would start to analyze images for people to go down that road. And then it was Philip who actually turned around and said, "Why don't you write a book?" And I was like, oh, okay, then I'll help you along the way, and he's been there. He's always there standing behind me right the way through.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. And basically that's where it started. And I started to analyze images, famous cases, not so famous cases, debunking cases. If I think it's not real, I will say, yeah, that's the first book, UFO Photo. And basically, I've gone over famous cases like the Los Angeles and things like that. All those famous cases, put it that way.
Yes.
And then the books obviously changed to different, obviously I still do the analysis for people, videos and photographs, but it changed really because with ufology, you'll find one door closes, another 5 will open. And we joked before, I call it the Richard Dreyfuss syndrome. The character of Close Encounters with Richard Dreyfuss plays
let's
him.
talk about this for a bit, because I think it is a real syndrome, and one that manifests in a number of ways. When you started to work actively, either maybe even before you were working with a 3D printer, were you involved in any conventional representations of UFOs, paintings, drawings, or you just kind of started with a printer or computer?
No, like I said, I started with the analyze. Well, started reading and watching like yourself. I've watched yourself. I watched Philip Mantle, Peter, Peter Robbins, yourself, Malcolm Robinson, Mary Rudd. You name. I've watched everybody, because you have to watch everybody. You can't just watch one person. You've got to look at all aspects, because there are so many, as we know, in ufology. And then it sort of took off from there. And then, like I said, I started to analyze, and that was the next step. Started to write the books, because obviously I went deeper down the rabbit hole, as we call it. I finding more and more things out, finding buildings on Mars, buildings on the moon, analyzing photographs that people have never seen. There's plenty out there that I've found that people have just not spoken about. And again, it sort of progressed on from there. And then one day, just like every other, I think I'm looking into new technology and everything, because I'm always on that side of making things. And again, the 3D thing came up, and I thought, oh, what's this? This is it. This is interesting. And I started on a very basic machine, really, really basic. And I thought, well, if people are painting, people are writing books and doing those sort of things, this is a different sort of media that people can see. And people when they write books are great, because people have imaginations when they read. When you put pictures in the book, it brings the writing to life. And this is the next stage. It's a 3D world, because we live in a 3D world. We live in a dimensional world, but it's different. And when you actually hold something in your hand of something you've read about, or, you've actually dealt with, it brings it to life. It brings it more home,
It certainly does. In a way, I don't know, it activates your imagination. And again, the evolution of some of your creations, they are incredibly detailed. It's one thing to be creative, just work from your imagination. It's another thing to be creative and be hyper specific and stick to an established description or a particular schematic, rather than, it's UFOs and the paranormal and I can take off on some directions. But in fact, you have been extremely rigorous in creating dioramas and figures that are representative of the absolute descriptions, many of them classic descriptions of particular non-human presences. Uh, I was very moved in looking at some of the photos that you had sent, that as well as choosing key cases in ufology, you've also at this point chosen key scenes in movies that we love. And the Richard Dreyfuss syndrome, I think if you said that to most people, they would immediately know what you're talking about based on the popularity of the subject, of the film, of course. Well, maybe we have to be a little more specific, but within the world of UFO studies, I think it would click with most people. And I think everybody probably remembers the scene. Very tense at home. Dreyfuss, of course, is beyond obsessed, and he is working on his mashed potatoes in his plate and creating the Devil's Tower. And his poor family just looks like they're all about to burst into tears and run out of the room. Probably notice something's going on with Dad. This means something. And that went through a lot of us. For me, the only equivalent I have is literally the day that my memory returned of the sighting I had with my sister. And then after speaking to her, and very careful not to feed her any lines, but set the scene, and she confirmed my memories to the greatest degree. People say my life changed overnight. Mine changed in a matter of moments, as she described to me something I had never heard of or heard before the being taken, an archetypically description. And I became so obsessed with what had happened to Helen that afternoon, the logical progression of my work, as far as I'm concerned, going back to 6 years old, because I have most of it, and I see that straight line of how I got from A to B to Z, that everything jumped the tracks, and I did my first UFO drawing. And for weeks and quite some months after, I literally had to fight my way out of it, but I was obsessed. I was not just doing drawings of UFOs. I was doing pages filled with ellipses. I was not functioning well. It was not a healthy situation to be in. And ultimately, I actually had to, I found a psychotherapist to help me to understand what had happened, the reality of the event, and that my sister and I weren't crazy. The world was. But by then, my art had completely transformed and never returned to where it had been, nor that commitment to being a fully professional artist that I had treasured for so many years. Something else was filling that spot, and I had a certain resentment toward it, as opposed to embracing it and whoopee, isn't this exciting? The very first UFO alien related object, thing, moment that you created with the 3D printer, what was that?
That was probably in conjunction with Philip Mantle, and it was the Pascagoula UFO, and it was the case. And then obviously I came up later with the figure, which is the ugly one. And I've been so lucky to have worked with Calvin Parker, and to come up with the being that he saw. Nobody had ever seen the female, because he was taken on board the craft as well. People, if you go into the story and the background, he was taken on board and had an interaction with a female ET. And I was lucky enough to do this book, which is the latest book out, which is the graphic novel I've done with Martin Powell, who actually writes.
Hooray.
He does Batman and Superman comics.
I am a huge fan of Martin Powell. I think he is one of the most talented writers and one of the most committed that I've ever met, and also happens to be one of the most knowledgeable people in terms of the world of popular literature, American popular culture, films and film history, and also one of the nicest people in the world. You really partnered up with the most extraordinary person you could, as far as I'm concerned. Good Lord. Martin
with
has,
him, you can see some of the illustrations I've done, and
Well,
basically it's all to do with Calvin's encounter taken on board, but nobody had ever seen the female ET, and I did. I'm trying to show you a better photograph of her. And basically, I worked. It took me a year and a half, I think, to finish this book. And I would be Skyping with Calvin, and we would basically do like a police fit, and I would draw what the female being was, what he said she looked like, and then I would we'd have it back, and I'd be saying, does she look like this? And he would go, no, the eyes were different, and eventually we got there in the end, and this is the only what I'm trying to show you now.
It's like working with a police artist. That's a wonderful way to finalize your image. Oh my.
But that's what she looked like. That was the female that was on board the craft. And Calvin was really, I know he was really made up with this book, because it was literally just before he passed. But finally got to the point. He said it was the only best thing next to a film that he would actually come up with, and I just wanted to get it. And it was obviously, all the encounters right after it, right the way through where he would write up, afterwards. And
beautiful illustrations. And that's when I look. I'll pick that up in September when I see you. But that's one I'm really looking forward to adding to my library, in part because it's really a perfect storm. Your graphic work, the attention, I think, for some people, partially because of what's still considered a novelty of these 3D printers, and that you can fabricate absolutely any shape that you want, and every nuance in the shape. It not to take attention away from the fact that in traditional terms, you're a wonderful graphic artist, and the fact that you're working with a writer who, Martin is a chameleon. And I know that the estates of famous writers whose work is now often out of copyright, people like Conan Doyle or Edgar Rice Burroughs, Sherlock Holmes, and Tarzan, that the estates or publishers' representatives of these world-beloved literary franchises, I've seen it with The Godfather, whatever, they select a writer who they feel can hold that level and generate that same feeling and originality and character development. And Martin has had that honor with both of those estates and many others as well. So, not to mention the fact that graphic novels have become such an international literary form. I literally remember about 25 years ago when I was first introduced to them, working for a multimedia company in Midtown Manhattan that specialized in, at a time when anime and manga, of course, was deeply ingrained into the culture of Japan, but it really hadn't penetrated as part of American youth culture yet. And seeing the Japanese graphic novels, whatever the plots were, and thinking, this is a time where we were starting to see like Art Spiegelman's Mouse and other transcendent jumps in, originally coming from comic strips and comic books. And all of a sudden, it's Pulitzer Prize land and great literary respect. And they are now an entirely respected, serious genre. It's only the tip of the iceberg, the beginning of, what I think can be a really important educational, as well as a simply enjoyable aspect of people's information intake, especially for younger folks, to introduce them responsibly to part of the whole UFO ethos and story in a form that they're already comfortable with, and that the world embraces now as just another form of literature. So bravo on another frontier entered with the graphic novel. That's exciting.
Yeah, we are planning to do more together later, and we're trying to do it. We did this book really in conjunction with Calvin because we wanted it to be very much like Philip Mantle, the way he's worked with Calvin right through. He's not changed anything. He's not altered anything. Yeah. Everything is to that witness's statements, information, everything relating to the case. And all the way through it, I would keep going back to Calvin and saying to him, what cars do you remember on the road? And,
fabulous.
You know what I mean? The detail that I wanted
investigative
to get in there.
Questions. Yeah.
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 And I wanted it to be this was a car that was just in the background as well. It's not even, it's just in the scene, if you know what I mean. But I wanted what do you remember? What do you actually, and he came out with so much information. He was a really, really nice gentleman. He was, Calvin.
He was indeed.
I've got a lot of time for him, and what he actually, went through in his life, and to get where and to come out the end and actually stand up on stage and still say the same thing of what happened to him. He stuck by everything right the way through. So hat off to him really in that respect. So I wanted to do him proud on this book,
Well, you certainly did. And our friend and colleague Philip Mantle's name has come up a number of times. Philip began in the trenches with the rest of us researchers and investigators, did great work for decades in the UK, and then continued to write, but moved to fill something of a vacuum and became a publisher. And Flying Disc Press has published many of our friends and colleagues' works over the years, but Philip has taken a step beyond that as well in terms of encouraging, supporting, being there to assist individuals in important cases or writers who are, in some cases, working on their first book. And I knew Charlie Hickson better than I knew Calvin. Charlie and I, who was with Calvin when they had their famous Pascagoula incident, considerably older than him. In fact, Calvin was the friend of Charlie's son, and they were out fishing together when this happened. But in 1989, Charlie organized a conference in Pascagoula. Myself, I think Whitley, Deb White Cabell, Stan Friedman, some others spoke there. But we had some downtime, and he took me back to the docks and the location and kind of made it all real for me. And one of the most abiding memories I have of Charlie was his ongoing concern for Calvin, because back then, Calvin was struggling terribly to not have to deal with this experience, these memories. It's not a new story, but it's also a more a macho culture. You don't want to admit that, you can be taken over, controlled, and then the ridicule, of course, that would have come with admitting it. And Calvin was really quite a lost soul at times back then. And I like to think how proud Charlie would be, not just of Calvin's terrific book, but the books that have followed, that Philip and Irena Scott, Dr. Irena Scott, have written. And we all knew this was an important case, certainly in the world of UFO studies, but it's one of the breakout stories now, and moving out into the world of literature and popular culture, where a lot of UFO related books stay right there. To kind of catch up on a thought that I lost the thread of before, talking about Close Encounters of the Third Kind, came out in 79, 80. Do you remember offhand? Early 80s?
Yeah, it was late 70s. Yeah.
Okay, I was just a few years into my, well, not even interest at that time, but obsession with the story, with the subject. And I was engaged at the time, and Catherine and I went to see the movie. This was not a subject that interested her, and one that she was not terribly comfortable that I was too interested in. But I remember as we were leaving the theater talking about it in terms of, this is really important. This is historic. That bit at the end that kind of underscored its significance, where the late, great J. Allen Hynek plays himself in a cameo in the control room with the great French director Truffaut playing Jacques Vallée in so many words. Well, there's a scene in that movie. There are lots of scenes in that movie, but it's one we all remember, where you've got the pickup truck at the railway tracks, and it ain't going to be a train that's coming through immediately. And for whatever reasons, and I'm so glad you did, you locked onto that scene and you decided to develop it into a fabrication. And I'm looking right now, and
it was basically an impact scene, wasn't it? It was a scene that you very iconic. And
Dreyfus would be in the truck. That was his job.
Yeah, and I just thought, obviously what happens to all of us in ufology, that Richard Dreyfus syndrome, and it was just stood out, didn't it? It was one of those things that you never forget. It was really important. But the whole movie was important, but certain parts of it.
But they made it very human for all of us. One of the details that was case related, and we all know that Steven Spielberg had some really quality people doing research, background work, where certain scenes and incidents and aspects of the film were based on alleged actual real accounts. In this moment here, one of the noticeable effect of being as close as his character was to the UFO was half of his face comes away deeply sunburned. And that's not without precedent in the real world. I wanted to ask you something. If, we see you in one of your workshops there, and it's particularly wonderful to wonder what's just out of frame for those of us that are not there with you.
Oh, yes. Well, in the back, the old black hole robots. Remember Vincent and old Bob, full-size C-3PO. Buck Rogers, the Tweaky robot. This guy, full-size battle droid off the Star Wars.
That's right.
I've actually donated these. These are actually going soon to a science fiction museum. I was lucky enough to be on holiday a couple of weeks ago up the northeast of England. And luckily, I don't know, we came across this science fiction museum. So I went and spoke to Neil Cole. He's actually a brilliant graphic designer himself, and he creates the museum. He's got all the old Doctor Who, BBC props from the movies and everything. If you want to go on my Facebook page, you'll see photographs of the actual museum. But when I got speaking to him, I need to make up some room in my house because things are taking over. So I said, I'll donate this guy and the old Bob and Vincent. So they'll be at the museum for him to see, for everyone to see when they go.
Where exactly is the museum?
It's in the northeast. I think it's a place near Hexham, a place called Hexham and Haltwhistle. They're the actual areas, and then it's around there. But if you can Google it, it's one of those places that are in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden you find the place, and the reason how you find it, there's a Dalek outside the front, full-size Dalek. So, if you go. But yeah, it's really worth, because the stuff he's got in there is the original BBC things that we used in Doctor Who. So you can walk around the entire museum and think, I remember that episode. I remember watching that. And you couldn't get me out of there. So, and then
again,
these guys. Yeah, these are the next models that are going to be coming along. Again, this is the Whitley Strieber one, which I showed you earlier on.
Yeah.
You can find it. Obviously, we did the first one, the Pascagoula case.
That one.
And then I wanted to do like a collection of them the same. And then this is the Whitley Strieber. So I don't know if you can see. It's not very clear.
Can you take the one, the model off to your right that's not in packaging, and hold its face close to the camera for us? The Whitley Strieber figure.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
I can take that out of there. So yeah, you've got the Whitley, if you can see.
Yeah,
you haven't got much light on it there, have you?
Yeah,
but you can see it when you know.
Yeah,
and it's more of a detailed site, very detailed again. But again, it's got a little plaque on the front, and then it's it's made. But again, you can take it out the packaging or leave it in. It's up to yourself.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to note, because we were joking about it beforehand, how, you know, in the world of grown-up guy geekdom, action figures and small figures associated with great cultural phenomena like The Simpsons or other very popular TV and movie franchises or what have you, have accrued absolutely astronomical values for some figures, as some collectibles do. It's one of the strange human phenomena that we, by agreement, agree that X is worth Y. And in itself, of course, it has no real value. You can't eat it. You can't, well, you might be able to barter it come the Armageddon. But that these figures have become emblematic, you know, of a certain societal, commercial thing. And that you, first, what makes yours different than a mass-produced figure is this, and this is, again, the Calvin Parker, Charlie Hickson figure, that each one of these is hand-cast and hand-finished. And the name plaque, I don't think you can really see it there, is laser engraved. They really are exquisite little representations of what of somebody's worst nightmare on a certain level, or of, you know, just another one of these guys or gals from whatever
I see them as just another chapter of the large book of, you know, again, we've got the graphic novels that obviously we've had the books for many years, you know, from many authors, you know, and then illustrations again that go on to, you know, videos that you'll watch, etc. I mean, one of the next one I'll be releasing is of another famous case, is the Kelly Hopkinson.
Oh yeah,
again, so
that's a wild looking figure.
Yes. Yeah, so
the one
this
with
is the
giant ears.
The prototype, which I've actually you know, CAD'd, got it all ready, 3D print one, make sure it's ready, then I'll miniaturize it and make a stand for it, and then again I'll produce those with a card back the same. Again, another one I'm going to be doing is the famous lamb being from what's in there? I've gone up my head now. His name, Crowley, Alistair Crowley. You know, again, the famous case again. Just trying to bring up cases that I think or feel that you know, they're a talking point, aren't they? There's something that you can look at, you can pick up, physically interact with.
And we're going to hold right there, go to break, and be back at the top of the hour. This is Peter Robbins with my special guest in Cheshire, England today, Jason Gleaves. Stay with us.
This September 6th through the 13th, join with like-minded souls in the experience of a lifetime on the Royal Caribbean Ovation of the Seas as we travel from Seattle to Alaska. Internationally renowned researchers, investigators, experiencers, authors, holistic healers, contactees, spiritual luminaries will sail on an extraordinary voyage of transformation. This cruise will explore UFOs, alien contact, cover-ups, ancient mysteries, the paranormal, holistic healing, and spirituality. Experience engaging lectures, one-on-one sessions, private, custom-tailored excursions, and a nightly UFO watch. The cruise is booking up fast. Go to contactatsea.com and be sure to mention the UNX Network when you book. That's contactatsea.com or phone 336-749-1219. That's 336-749-1219.
This is Margie Kay, and I'd like to say thank you to all of our KUNX show hosts, staff, listeners, and viewers for making us number one on Paranormal Talk Radio.
While most near-death experiencers return to this plane of existence with alluring tales of their time spent in the presence of the divine, what happens when one crosses the veil into the afterlife, into the void? In the new book, Dying to Meet Them, Mindy Toutfest describes her journey to the afterlife after a devastating aneurysm, how a strange turn of events would lead her to spiritual growth, divine healing, UFO experiences, and a greater understanding of the universe. Get your copy of Dying to Meet Them today at Amazon.com or visit unxmedia.com for more information on this book and more amazing selections from UNX Media Publishing at unxmedia.com.
And we are back. Peter Robbins. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth, and we are talking to Jason Gleaves in Cheshire, England. Jason, at our break, I retrieved something from my closet I've had, oh gosh, I think since about 1999 or so. 1997, as you may remember, was a pull out the stops crazy year in terms of UFO publications and toys and special limited editions of candy and cosmetics and everything imaginable, because it was the 50th anniversary of Roswell Kenneth Arnold. And I was in the UK twice that summer and observed the same thing I had observing in America, which was, it was overload. It really was. There was so much on television and so much on the newsstands and so much in popular conversation that in a way it killed the conversation for several years. Everybody had just kind of overdosed on it a bit. And at the time, well, in 98 through 2004, my major project was a website called UFOcity.com. And I had a corporate backer. It was 5 days a week posting UFO-related breaking stories from around the country. I had so many wonderful people as reporters who went on to fairly distinguished careers after the fact. And one of the things my boss taught me was negotiating small trade deals with manufacturers. And he wanted to, have all kinds of UFO toys and whatever. One of them was by a company called Shadowbox Miniatures. And they had sent me a sample to enroll me. I don't know how many we actually sold, but I thought, as a commercial precursor to what you're doing with a six-pack mentality, here is the international trading cards included on the back, Alien Collection.
Oh, wow.
I know, eat your heart out.
Yeah.
And they make a point of saying the Gray, Reptilian, Roswell, Menate, Ancient, Nordic, Man in Black, and trading cards, etc. It didn't catch on. Children around the country were not enamored. And I don't know how many of these are still lingering in warehouses, but don't we wish we had a bunch? But again, these are knocked out of machines, painted on assembly lines in China. It's a very different sensibility. The way that you are combining art, craftsmanship, education about real events, and appealing to people that do like to collect and, have an interest in our subject. I wanted to ask you about your book, UFO Encounters Up Close and Personal. It's a rhetorical question, of course, because I've read and enjoyed the book and is proud to be a contributor. But you did something, I think, that was very wise, that a lot of writers, especially those of us with fairly healthy egos, if I'm going to write, it's going to be about me, or what I saw, etc. You kind of defer, take a step back, and allow other accounts to come to life. Talk about your original idea for this book and how it kind of developed, because it worked out wonderfully well.
That book really came as the next sort of stage in the writing of. The first book was about images and analysis and how I do it, and no secrets. This is how I do it. Again, I don't want to hold back. And I just wanted some cases that people knew, people didn't know, and wanted to go down that road, which is part of everyone's, path into ufology. The second book, I wanted, again, where it got deeper, where I wanted to explain, as we were talking before about the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where did that come from? What do you mean third kind? So I didn't realize there was Close Encounter of the First Kind, Close Encounter of the Second, Third. It actually goes to 7. There's 7 different categories. And we're talking, obviously, Close Encounters of the Third Kind with Dr. Heineken, and he came out with that saying, or, term, as we call it, and it brought it into the psyche of everybody that they know what that means, and it's part of the film and what happens. So what are the next stages? So I went in that side, and Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind is really abductions, and that was really spoken about after the film. Many years later, Travis Walton, obviously the Pascagoula case, Betty and Barney Hill, all those cases. It's an abduction case, so it's Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind. And then you go to the fifth, where people are having audible communications, maybe in the sleep paralysis. I can't even say it. The word
paralysis.
Yeah, that's it. And they're having a communication with ETs, etc. So that's another stage. And then I wanted to really go on. And then 6 is one really we don't really want to talk about, is where people have been killed or injured through UFO interactions, but mainly talking military side in that, where craft have been actually discovered, not to go into too much detail, where there's been human body parts being found on board, things like that. So it's another area, another section of the categories. And then obviously the last one, Close Encounters of the Seventh Kind, is we're talking about the spin-off, as we call it. Where have I got my notes on that? So you're talking human hybrids, and again, that's the next stage that people are talking about. Why are they abducting us? Why are they taking our DNA? They want to actually, again, it opens another can of worms. But on that, so that was really that book. I wanted to go down that road, and then I wanted to put cases to each category in that book at Ufology Umbrella. I wanted to actually put cases to the categories right the way through, so people could basically just understand it more, just like me, because it's part of my journey. I've always said that you don't have to listen to a thing that I say, you don't have to believe a thing I say, but get out there and do your own research, because once you know the truth, or your truth, it's up to you what you do with it, whether you pass it on to somebody else, or you've gathered that information. And then the next book, like you said earlier on, the UFO, where is it? UFO Encounters, up close and personal. So then I wanted to go into the cases of ufologists around the world. I've been so lucky, and I'm so humbled that I've got to work with so many people. Many people, like I said earlier on, that I've been brought up reading about, looking at their cases, and they've gone on to become good friends. It's amazing, and like I said, I'm so humbled about it. So what I wanted to do was actually look into how they got into ufology. I wanted to know, was it a famous case? Was it an encounter? Was it something that just happened to them? Did they hear about something that got them into it? And I went into everybody and anybody around the world, and I think there's about 50 odd people in this book, ufologists, including yourself. And I just wanted to know what got them there, and they come up with these cases, and many cases are unknown cases that I've heard about. With Mary Rodwell, she was in the book, and she came up with the Chinese Roswell, which again people don't know about, and it's a famous case, well documented. Again, the same, all the information. And then obviously there are not a lot of images and things like that I could actually relate, so I had to illustrate. So I would take all the accounts, do it, and then I would actually doing illustrations to go with the book, to go with their accounts, so people again could see in relation to what they were telling you. But and that was really that was the book I wanted to do. I did think of doing another one, because there was so many people that I could put in the book. Who was it? Oh, Bruce Maccabee. he actually gave me, he's a person who I look up to because he was doing what I'm doing now many years ago. Yeah. And he actually brought me into the realm of, analyzing of images. And when I contacted Bruce, and he actually gave me his first ever scientific paper he wrote, which has never been published before, and he gave me permission to put it in the book. And it was how do you get into ufology? Why do we talk about it? And it's fascinating, and I didn't change a word exactly to what he wrote. So there's many people. We've got many UK ufologists in there.
Sure.
Both Kinsella brothers we were talking about earlier, Philip and
spoke to them both yesterday.
Yeah, and this model here. This is the prototype I did for Ronald and Philip Kinsella. Their alien dog.
Yes.
This is the only one. Obviously, I sent one to them, and they've got the thing. But this is the print of what we did for them. He did all the work, obviously.
I find myself processing as familiar with more traditional artist tools that technically I'm not used to thinking of three-dimensional works as prints, but in fact, it's a 3D printer. It's just printing in 3 dimensions rather than 2.
There's no limit to a 3D printer. What I actually say to people is there is no limit to what you can make, what you can think about. It's just up to you. It's what you come up with. And then
for an artist, of course, your only limitations are your imagination. If you're, a professional fabricator, all of a sudden, the world of problem solving is on another dimension because it's, slide rule and calipers and building 3-dimensional clay models.
Yeah.
It's several light years jump for sure. You now have 5 3D printers?
9 printers. I've actually just bought another one, which is behind me, and that's obviously the process of. But there's 2 different types of printers I have. There is one called a filament printer, where it basically like a shoestring of plastic, and it's fed into the printer, heated up, melted, and it's basically a plotter. And it plots and builds in layers. Obviously, it brings to life what you've actually brought. And then there's another printer, I've got a few of, resin, which is liquid. And it goes into a bath, and it actually prints in liquid. So you get these sort of figures out of the resin. They're actually like a resin.
Wow. In discussing all the things we are, for me, with somebody with your background, knowledge, and experience, the discussion is often roundabout, or you circle back because one thought generates 3 others. And talking about close encounters, the 8th kind, and discussing a being we now generally refer to as a hybrid that is part us, part them. Now, within the world of UFO studies, this is generally an accepted expression of a certain aspect of reality, wild as it sounds. If one wants to take it down to the baseline, we need to remember hybrids. Human beings have been doing it for hundreds of years with plants, and in this century with DNA and other, organic materials to create hybrids. There's nothing radical here except that these other intelligences, for reasons we can only make educated guesses about, although some people absolutely say they know, and there's only, as far as I'm concerned, a limited number of possibilities, that these beings Some of them look enough like us that they are among us. Other ones don't look enough like us and are somewhere else. In the late 70s, when the area of abduction research was really in its infancy, in great part because serious individuals involved in the work understood they were struggling for being taken seriously to start with, and as what we'll otherwise call adults, professional people, long to be taken seriously. You could have a shot at being taken seriously with a discussion of radar returns or an analysis of organic material that had interfaced in some paranormal situation or declassified documents, but talking about aliens and hybrids was not considered good form. You're just going to sound like a crazy person. For what it's worth, after I started working with Bud Hopkins in the 1980s, early on, his first book, Missing Time, came out in 1981. And by then we had been friends and fellow artists for 5 years. I don't remember exactly what case it was, but I was privileged to be a fly on the wall, or, an observer, an individual involved in several hundred cases, dispassionate word for sometimes people's most shattering experiences. But the very first time a case came up that really pointed to a part them, part us being involved, I really I couldn't assimilate it. It just freaked me out. We all have our own tolerances, our own places where we draw the line until we can redraw the line. And I remember thinking, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened to my sister and people who are being taken. This is a bit much for me. And I just didn't discuss it with Bud. It would come up occasionally in cases. It took me about a year to not normalize it with myself, but to accept that this was a logical extension of this phenomenon. And it brings up questions for me, and I wonder for you, about the nature of this, the way we now use the word disclosure with a capital D. I think there's a picture in many people's minds who have an interest in transparency regarding this subject, in a more open world of information, and getting a better idea, any idea of what's really going on from officialdom's point of view, that we're waiting for an event. In America, the archetype is the president goes on television, blah, 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 coordinated most likely with other world leaders at the same time, and that's disclosure. We may well witness individual events like that, from my point of view, within the process, but a process it is. And it is simply rolling along now. I think it's also fair to say that wherever possible, those who have always moved the chess pieces around and who determine the nature of what is all right for the public to know and what should be kept away from them, that there are behind the scenes struggles now that are operatic. Overload them with information, give them something where they can chase their tail. Here's something where we can have people arguing with each other about this point, but let's slow this process down. Number one, because our identity, those of us behind the scenes whose names you don't know, is caught up in this huge responsibility. This cabal we are part of, this privileged secret keeping that, makes me feel so special. And at the same time, every time you do a show like this, or somebody buys one of your figures and actually decides to learn more about where this image comes from, or reads a book by you or me or any of our friends or colleagues, or sees a good documentary or goes to a conference, that process is continuing every day. More and more people are taking the subject seriously and could care less what other people think about it. I think problem is the wrong word, but the challenge here is that it's progressing at its own rate, which is 8, 10, 15, 180 people a day, have an experience or are just finally convinced by a preponderance of evidence and kind of cross that line. If they don't become activists, they become more involved and want to educate themselves more because they know something's going on. But you and your work are a part of that process. Do you think sometimes about your work going out into the world and not just being, a charming conversation starter or among a collection of other similar type items, but of actually making a difference in the world of people's thinking on the subject of UFOs and their consciousness around it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's my goal, really, by putting these things out, or to make people realize they can actually, well, it's a sort of trigger, isn't it? That we said, it's something that you will see in an interesting thing that will get the interest going for that person. So they'll start to look at the basics. And as we know, it's a big rabbit hole. So, you've got to start somewhere. It doesn't matter where you start because you fall in somewhere, don't you? I've always wanted, with the books, especially with the books, when I've started to do that, I always said, if I sold one book and one person read the book, I've done my job. Because that's the goal, isn't it? It's not about financial gain to me, that side of it. It's never interested me. I've got a job. I've got a full-time job that pays my bills and things. This is something that has taken over really from my job, but
Yeah,
it's not the important financial side of it. So I don't like the gravy train type of thing, where people jump on and that. I've never liked that side of it. And I've always thought that, I still do today, if you can afford to buy books to read or to watch something, but pay for it, let's put it that way. Why? Because you can afford it, why do you get the information? And why is it somebody that can't afford to read and buy the books? Why are they less important to actually be involved? And to me, everybody is on the same level. I've done it in the past. I give away a lot of books to people that I know financially they can't afford to pay for them. That's the thing. It's a feel good for you. It's good that that
it's
your
also a
word
mark
is,
of a mark of character. I agree with you also on a certain, I guess, a philosophical point. Everything that I've gleaned about you in our modest time actually together, or communications or things about you, is there's not a lot of, aggressive ego going on. You don't have anything to prove. Like you say, you don't have to, you work hard at your job and you take pride in your profession. You don't have to make a profit on your UFO related books and objects to justify doing it. And at the same time, people deserve to be paid for their work unless they want to donate it. And I'm with you in that we are all in this together. I've observed a handful of particularly well-known people in the work over decades who, of course, do good work and have earned all the kudos they've acquired, but they're kind of prima donnas and they like being treated particularly special because that's the way they've come to think of themselves, where other people who are special, we all are in our own ways, but they don't see themselves as above the crowd. We're workers, we're on the same team. And I think we probably had similar experiences here, that feeling when you're not well known and you're starting out and you're serious about wanting to make a contribution, and you're in a atmosphere, a event, what have you, where there are well-known people, authors, lecturers, filmmakers who, you've grown to admire and respect. And that awkwardness of going through, I know it's a conference and things, but they look so busy, and making contact with them. And in many cases, finding out that the best known, the ones you respect the most, the ones that you admire, are the most down to earth, the most unassuming, and the most encouraging. The ones who you look back and say, I remember sitting down with that person. And even the little bit that they said to me, it still resonates in my head. And the wonderful inscription in my book, if I ever become well-known or respected in this work, I'm going to try to emulate that kind of behavior and encourage or be there to assist, that next generation coming up. And that's exactly what's happened with me. And it's kind of a mixed feeling of pride, like you say, humility, and that you're part of something bigger than yourself. Where for me, for most of the decades that I did this work, I simply started naturally by thinking of myself as an outsider, that I was going to be judged in part as not a crank, but, a quirky type individual. And starting when I did in the later 70s, UFO flying saucer studies were always relegated to the fringe at a time when, now we live in the golden age of conspiracy culture, and it's somewhat unnerving. My belief in something that somebody said is equal to your PhD and years of study and on the ground, because I'm entitled to my opinion. Is that something that you have found as well? And looking back, can you cite a particular? I'll give you one, which is in 1987. I went to a conference in Washington, D.C. at American University. It was 87, so it was the 40th anniversary of Roswell, Kenneth Arnold. And Stanton Friedman was one of the main speakers, as was Len Stringfield. Len is an American pioneer researcher, investigator into alleged crashes. Among other people, there they were at their book table. I had heard Stan speak several times, but it was a quiet moment and started to chat. And the two of them were sitting together. And at a certain point, Len said, come on, sit down here with us. And the next thing I knew, I'm behind that table. It didn't seem to register with them, but for me, holy shit, here I am sitting on a chair between Stanton T. Friedman and Len Stringfield, both of them wanting to know about my interest in the subject and encouraging me to move forward. And that moment of thinking, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do my best to do just that. And if I have any measure of success, I want people to remember a moment like this with me years in the future that they may look back on. You have experiences like that also in the last years?
Yeah. Again, people ask that question about disclosure, to you, and I've always said the same thing. Disclosure's already happened, just because of the vast amount of images and experiences, what people have said. I had, obviously, years ago, and we spoke just like yourself earlier, where you wouldn't speak about what happened to you and you felt uncomfortable with it. And I've not long come out and spoke really when I had, it was when I returned after the first Gulf War home. And not to go into a big thing, I had a really bad time when I came back. You know, didn't handle it very well. There was a lot of bad things going on. And long story short, I had a grey in my house, a small grey. I actually wrote about it in Philip's new book. His new book, he's just done on encounters. And again, it's not something I really spoke about much, you know, and I've spoke more about the missing time incidents I've had.
Yeah.
You know, a famous one for me, really, I've spoke about a few times is really, I've got 2 dogs that I walk every day. I go around a reservoir, which is just right near my house, a wooded area, and I can walk around that in 20 minutes and get back home.
Okay.
Bang. You know, if I don't have a lot of time, I could still walk the dog, but, you know, a 20-minute compared
Come
to
back.
a couple of hours. Yeah. And I left knowing we were going out, me and my wife, and we were going to go out somewhere. So I said, right, I'll just walk the dogs. Went round the reservoir. Remember getting to the top of the reservoir, and in the distance, I could hear a Chinook helicopter approaching. Now, Chinook helicopters, the twin-rotored helicopters,
Right.
you
Big
know,
helicopters.
the military helicopters, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know
Major
because I
lift.
used to work, I worked on them, so I know the sound. The sound is very distinct. You know, you'll know if you hear it. And I thought, oh, and I knew that it was actually going to come out. I could see it in the distance, and I thought, oh, it's going to come right over. I'll get my camera out, you know, on my phone, take a video of it. And I remember it coming right over, really low, thinking, wow, you know, it's nice to see, you know, reminisce of what I used to work on, blah, blah, blah. Took a video. I can remember putting my phone in my pocket, walking the dogs, 20 minutes walking round, got back home, and my wife said, where have you been? And I said, up round the reservoir. I said, I was just going to walk the dogs for 20 minutes. And the son was there, and he said, you've been gone over an hour and a half.
Son of a bitch.
And I said, no, I've 20, honestly felt like 20 minutes still, you know, short time back. I said, no, and didn't think much of it. I've still got the footage to this day on my phone. And all it is on the footage is you could see me filming my feet. And you can hear the Chinook helicopter flying away. And I know I did everything right and it was all there. And so it's just one of the instances of missing time. I had another where it was at Coningsby.
I was going to ask you, please, this is a very important aspect of these experiences. And so many people have had them. It's not out of the question that some of our viewers and listeners are not familiar with a firsthand account. They know the phrase, but please set the stage and fill us in on the one you're about to tell us.
The longest one that I can remember where I was driving back home when I was in the Air Force, and I was driving from RAF Coningsby, which is in Lincolnshire. I was driving back home to Cheshire, and the drive used to take me probably going back a few years, the roads weren't as good, so you're driving across country. So it'd take me roughly, I would say, 5.5, 6 hours drive across. I can remember leaving Coningsby, and I can remember arriving at home, but I don't remember the middle part of a 5-hour drive. Yeah, it was very surreal. It was one of those where it's like we're having this conversation now, and we've started it and we're just finishing. All that middle bit we've spoken about, gone, completely gone. So there's things that have happened like that. Again, the same with the grey in the house, you know, after the first Gulf War. Incidentally, I never put this together. I'd returned from the first Gulf War and I had the incident with the grey in the house. I was posted to RAF Cosford. And that's where the triangle came down over the base when I was there. So whether you want to put 2 and 2 together and come up with 4 or more, it's up to you. But yeah, all part of.
I want to go through some of the images that you sent. First, again, the Parker Hickson figure.
The Whitley, yeah.
Oh, no, Whitley, right,
The
exactly.
humanoid alien, yeah.
Now, this one, also, it's a rather dramatic photograph, too, the high contrast. Tell us a bit about the figure that we're looking at here.
That's a different type of grey that somebody asked for. It's a gentleman who lives in Belgium, I believe, and it's over there. I'm not sure if it went in a museum over there. I've had quite a few works that have been taken and put into museums all over the place, you know.
What an honor.
Yeah, it really is. You know, that people, again, it's another way of somebody seeing what, you know, as we know, there are so many different types of grey. You know, you got the large elongated eyes, you know, that people generally put to, you know, the tight jumpsuits, very thin bodies, large head, etc. I mean, the actual grey I saw was more like this guy, which was the Travis Walton, which was the Fire in the Sky. He had very, very small human eyes, but very small features, but very small, not a very tall, but nothing like the greys that you see, again, which were on there. Again, that was the Close Encounters. Yeah.
Yeah. And let me ask you a question here, a mercantile related question. If somebody wants to, say, acquire one of your smaller figures that we've looked at, you manufacture them on order. You get an order, you make one, or you may have a small, you know, number that are already made. However, you, because of these printers and your skill and imagination, you have now created a number of things of substantial size. Same thing, of course, for colleagues that are also pioneering with in the arts with 3D printers, like Ronnie Kinsella, that the droid figure that you mentioned, again, science fiction, but very authentic to, you know, the being in the famous films. This is full size. You don't, if somebody wants to order something like that, that I imagine is a special order that you only do on contract, or?
Yeah. I generally try to keep a lot of the models to not many of them, as in, so it's more collectible to the person, so it's more valuable to them, you know, so it's not like everybody has got them. But if somebody wants something in particular, just contact me and I can do anything, really. It's not, you know, open. I mean, it's like the full-size droids, and I've got the full-size R2-D2 in another workshop, and full-size Stormtrooper and Darth Vader. You know, that's why I said I need to make room, so that's why I donated this guy, you know, out and to make room for the next one. But it's just, I can't stop. It's that we were taught. I'll watch something on YouTube or whatever, and I think I've got to go make that. I've got to produce it. It's part of, like, we're always looking for the next thing to watch. You know, the next YouTube channel. You see a really good show, you want to watch the next one right away, don't you? You know, so I want to go and make something. You know,
but there's also, it's informed by a deeper artistic tradition as well. We know it when we're onto it. You can be a child or a fully recognized professional, adult, grown-up artist, and you lock into a subject matter or a form, and you execute it. And you not only like the way it came out, but you like the way it felt doing it, the process. And so you embark on a variation of it. And same thing there. And you continue to do variations until I think one of the great understated tools of created artists, probably always unconscious or semi-conscious, is boredom. Okay, I got this down. Where do I go next? Where's my little invisible divining rod dipping here to make my next creation? Think about Monet's haystacks, or wonderful series of soft, beautiful impressionist paintings of the House of Parliament on the Thames. You can Google these things, folks. And being somebody who always loves the classic visual arts, I post paintings every week on my page. But Andy Warhol picked it up brilliantly in a kind of mechanical way. And the novelty of his soup cans when they started to appear as absolutely straight-faced paintings, $500 each, seemed absolutely crazy. I think there were 28 in the original series, and not a single one of them sold, which the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is very happy about, because you can walk into a room and there they are. But again, that serial sensibility, that I like doing that. I want to do another one. I can, looking at these figures in the left to the front, I can see that series growing infinitely and indefinitely until you're not interested in pursuing it anymore. And then somebody's going to come to you and say, can you create a representation of this one that I experienced? And, part of you will go, yep, back in gear, and here we go. If somebody, for example, says, I love this little truck, and I remember that scene, and, as a serious student of film or of UFOs, this brings my two interests together. This is somewhat more complex, but somebody can just contact you and get a price and order that and have that on their desk at a period of time after.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Awesome.
I've always wanted to, another thing I've always really wanted to do, if I could have done, was work on TV and films on the special effects and stuff like that, because the things I've learned, as in the carpentry, the painting, the model making,
of course,
it just no end really of what that's all about. I think I love watching, is it Adam Savage? Is it the he had a show on, I've forgotten, it's gone out of my head, the Busters show on Discovery or whatever it was, and he's got his own YouTube channel now, but he's worked in all the Star Wars films, all these, Ghostbusters, everything, but he actually makes props, and you can watch him making them and and I've always been fascinated by that.
You'd be ideal at that, obviously. In the history of film, certain objects, stay with us, are emblematic of that cultural experience, so to say. Talking before the show, the cast lead black painted falcon in the Maltese Falcon is iconic of a symbol of something more, like the Holy Grail, so to say. Not quite fair comparison. Go here.
Oh,
again,
yes.
The
Tweaky.
amount of the detail.
That's him up there, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the detail really is unlimited. Thinking if that were the result of chipping away at stone, or carving something out of styrofoam, or out of wood, or plastic casting, it couldn't be. I mean, the technology is so exacting, you can capture every detail as perfectly as it's humanly possible. It's really exhilarating to think. Again, for me, I think primarily in the right side of my brain, and I can respect and try to imagine all of the industrial uses of a 3D printer. Although, as you're probably aware, when they first started to make the headlines In America, there was only one subject,
Yes.
which is
Yeah.
3D printed
Firearms.
guns,
Yeah, that's it.
and that it
Yes.
wouldn't be picked up by, scans and things in your luggage. A charming thought, I thought. But to talk about if that were, had become the dominant reality, you're literally beating your your sword into a plowshare, and
Yeah.
creating anything to inform, educate, entertain. Okay, here we come into another
Oh,
one. And when I started
Philip.
to see this
Yeah.
series, I had to laugh because all I could imagine was myself, and that sense that if we're lucky, we preserve as adults, but we have as children, of combining play and creation. And oh my God, I know where I am. This is the climax of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. How far is he going to take this? And of course, finding out that the answer to that question is quite far.
That's Philip Mantle has got that. Yeah, he asked me to do it a while ago. It took me a long time. Everything is handmade.
Yeah.
From the rocks to, and it's all done from the drawings from the original props.
I have to tell you, I went back to still scenes after you sent me these pictures some weeks back, still scenes from the end of Close Encounters, to entertain myself, to try to find something that you got wrong. And you didn't. All the color coding, the stripes. And it's funny, the things that you stick on as an artist and as somebody always interested in how fabricating challenges are realized to make something convincing. The rocks themselves, obviously, created for this, but also the result of 3D printers. They have their own character. It's not like, I finished with the thing and let's just pile some crap around it to make it look like it's outdoors.
Yes, it's just one of those iconic. It's something that it's like all the Star Wars things, I can't stop making whatever it is related. I mean,
so interesting.
Just trying to show you. I mean, even down people have asked me to do little World Cup
oh
things,
my gosh.
Like
oh gosh.
It's, honest to God, it's the old this isn't finished, but I've done it for a few people. The Glock, which is the German bell.
Yeah, I'm laughing.
I can't stop. Not Sphinx.
Whoa. Yeah.
It's just I see things and then I'm like, I've got to make that. I've got to do it.
Well, again, it's like you have been given the tools. If it was 50 or 100 years ago, somebody handing you a handful of paintbrushes, a bunch of tubes of paint, a palette, canvas, get to it. This tool, it absolutely unleashes the imagination as far as, artists' work go. I was laughing before, though, when you said somebody had asked you to consider creating, a World Cup diorama. I thought, we're going to have a separate area of guys beating the shit out of each other together, or is it going to be kind of a peaceful World Cup?
So, well, there is that side to it too.
Possibilities.
Yeah.
Moving on to some of your photo analysis, people send you things, and you've really qualified. Reading your book on photo analysis and the connection to Bruce, Dr. Maccabee, really impressed me.
This image here is I've done a lot of work through Peter Slattery in Australia, and he has in link with, but this was a being that we photographed. He said we heard the footprints on the roof outside and went outside, and this was the being near his truck who he photographed. That's just the analysis I did of it,
Hmm. In a case like this, Jason, where the individual you're interfacing with is not just not there, but some thousands of miles away, and the chances you're not going to get to sit down with them, have one-to-one conversations, look them in the eye, watch their body language, hear their inflection in person, but yet you you would probably not have done an analysis and made it public if you had some really dodgy feelings about the character of the individual, or they're trying to get one over on you.
Yeah.
We can all be fooled, of course, and there are
Yeah.
people, good, bad, or indifferent, whose intentions are sometimes to fool us. But this is not a case like that. This is somebody who you feel is a credible witness and submitted a photograph in good faith.
Yes. Peter, I put Peter probably in the top 1% of abductees in the world. You know, I put him on par with Calvin Parker and people like that. It's that important.
That's impressive.
And I really came across Peter first through my own journey, because I was watching all the videos on regression and watching Mary Rodwell do her work, and she did a regression session with Peter. That's how I came across him.
Okay.
And then we sort of took off, and then I started to analyze his images before I even spoke to Pete. And then I would literally go into it in detail. And then it was all linked. And then you actually go onto his site. I think eseti.org. If you go on there, anyone can go on. You'll see all the analyzed videos I've done for him, all the videos, the images, and all the different beings he's seen. And this is just one. And this being that you can see in the photograph, he actually set up in his home a motion camera. And I'll be showing these videos when we do our talk in Hull University.
Oh, great. In fact, being that we're coming into our last few minutes, let's remember that we will be seeing each other again on the 14th of September. It is a Saturday, and we will be together in the great city of Hull in Yorkshire, speaking at the Outer Limits Magazine conference. You and I, needless to say, are quite excited about this. It's going to be a really first-rate event from beginning to end. Organizer, colleague, dear friend Chris Evers has secured an absolutely first-rate professional lecture hall, University of Hull, and get your tickets now. It may be your only chance ever to hear and meet Whitley Strieber, for example, who, by just a great quirk of fate, had planned to be in the UK at that time, and was kind enough to accept the invitation to speak at the conference. Again, you've got it right here, olm-mag.co.uk. Register for the conference. We will be there. We will be glad to spend time and hang out with you. Also, as we sum up, Jason, where besides your Facebook page can people go to connect with you, ask you questions, send you videos, or still buy signed books or your figures or dioramas? What location should they go to?
Well, again, if you go on Facebook, you can find me there. You can message me there. You can send me emails at jasonufo@outlook.com. Again, you know, I'll try and answer what I can when I get time. I will get back to you. I'm in the process of doing a couple of analyzed photographs for people now, you know, with lots of stuff privately where they don't want to put it out there, or, you know, and I know I do try and get back to everyone I can, time restricted and everything else related. And again, you can get any of the books through Flying Disc Press or Amazon.com. And I think the new graphic novel is with Moonstone Books, so you can get that there.
And the title of the new graphic novel is, again?
It is. I shall show you. It's a UFO: The Closest Encounter, a true story of Calvin Parker.
Perfect. We are in missing time now. Jason Gleaves, my friend, my colleague, it has been a pleasure to have you on the show. Have a good summer. Keep doing what you're doing, and looking forward to seeing you in September.
Likewise. And it's been a pleasure being on your show. We'll have to do it again.
Absolutely. Peter Robbins here with Jason Gleaves. Meanwhile, here on Earth is the show. See you next week.